Obsidian Flames has been out for a little over a week now, and I have thoughts. Now, of course, being a YouTuber, I'm self-important enough to think that you want to hear those thoughts. So if you've already tried Toad Scroll EX and now you're lost on how to have some fun in the new format, here are the 3 decks I've been jamming games with in Obsidian Flames Standard. A quick disclaimer, we're only about 8 days into the format as of the recording of this video, so all the decks I'm going to show you today are definitely works in progress. And I think the first deck we're looking at right now is definitely the one that fits that tag the most. This is the newest deck that I've been working on since the format started. It's only about 4 days old right now in this current incarnation, but I have done some tuning to it. That said, I should also point out this card features 0 new cards from Obsidian Flames, so fun fact. I guess by now you've had long enough to stare at this burning trash pile while I run my mouth, but not quite enough time to identify what that smell is that it's putting off. So really I should tell you this is just a Radiant Eternatus deck. In case you've never read this card, ran into that a lot in the comments in my last video, people not knowing what the cards do. So what this does, it has an ability called Climactic Gate. When you bench it from your hand during your turn, you go through your deck and you just find 2 VMax Pokemon, you throw them onto the bench. You don't worry about any of that loser stuff like evolving them. They just go directly onto the bench. I guess it's also worth pointing out this has an attack that does 200 damage on like a single prize Pokemon. That's something, but mostly what we're looking to do with this is go grab a couple of Gengar VMAX and throw them onto the bench. This is a 320 HP VMAX Pokemon with a couple of cool attacks. It does have this Gmax Swallow Up attack, takes 3 Dark Energy, it can't attack next turn, it does 250 damage, which will one-shot a whole lot of stuff. We'll use that sometimes, but other times, just for a couple of energy, if you're a little hard up, you can still beat up on the Mew decks that just play like a billion V Pokemon, because this attack's going to do a lot of damage, especially against the Mew decks, because it's going to hit them for weakness, and it also hits Gardevoir for weakness. That's kind of important because both of those decks were in the finals of the World Championships last week. Probably going to see a lot of those in the coming weeks, so it's good to have something like this that hits them for weakness so easily. Now, obviously, a lot of this game plan hinges on finding Radiant Eternatus as quickly as possible, ideally on turn 1, right? So a lot of our deck is dedicated to doing that. We're running the 4 of Ultra Ball that you might expect, as well as a 2 of Capturing Aroma. If this lands on the right side, it can go grab the Radiant Eternatus, but if it lands on the other side, it kind of doesn't matter. We've got some evolved Pokemon in here that we don't mind grabbing too. Like, for instance, the Arceus V-Star. We throw this on an Arceus V, and then suddenly this can just go get the Radiant Eternatus on turn 2 if we haven't found it yet. That's a nice thing to be able to do, but obviously, Starbirth is just a ridiculous ability. Going and tutoring up, in Magic parlance, 2 different cards, whatever you want, in one turn is just kind of broken. So, we're playing Arceus V-Star for that reason, but we're also just playing it because it's a pretty strong Pokemon package, right? A little 4-2 line here that I think you could go down to 3-2 on if you wanted to. However, I do think there's something to be said about playing the full playset of Arceus here because it cuts down on the amount of times that we have to throw a Radiant Eternatus into active on turn 1, and that's kind of a nightmare for this deck. As a matter of fact, we want this Radiant as early as possible, so much so, and yes, I'm still on this point, that we're resorting to the Silver Bullet Squawk ability, the Squawk of Shame, but it's important that we get these cards as quickly as we can, and that's not just Radiant Eternatus, but it's also stuff like Arceus V. We want to get to V-Star so we can pull cool cards out of our deck, whatever we need, right? But it's also important to have Arceus V inactive as quickly as possible a lot of the time, and that way we can actually charge up these V-Star Pokemon we're benching. We even go so far as to play 2, count them 2, Hisuian Heavy Balls in the main deck. We want to find this as quickly as possible in case Radiant Eternatus ends up in the prize cards. We want to save it and ourselves from that tragic fate. We've even got Research in the deck, which you kind of might expect. I act like it's this big shocker, but yeah, Research is in here to make sure we draw into important cards. And Iono, which actually serves kind of an important role in this deck. If you haven't read this card because you can't read it on screen, there's just absolutely no way. This is kind of like a Research, but each player is going to shuffle their hand to the bottom of their library. Shuffle your hand, put it on the bottom, then draw for as many prize cards as you have remaining. A really important card in this format right now. And it's great in this deck just in case these VMAX Pokemon end up in your hand, you shuffle them back into the deck. Now, there are times where you might want a VMAX Pokemon in your hand. We actually don't have a Gengar V in this deck, which could be this a massive mistake I should probably correct, but right now I've been running it without it and I don't really care. But I do have 2 Umbreon VMAX in the deck, and I have the Umbreon V to evolve it from. I think this is kind of an important line, just a 2-2 here. Obviously, in case you haven't read Umbreon VMAX yet, the ability here is basically a boss's orders. You just get to switch out your opponent's active Pokemon Pokemon with whatever you want when you evolve Umbreon VMAX. So I do think it's important to have a way to evolve this card. But just in case you have a Gengar VMAX that ends up in your prize cards when you go to pull VMAXs with Eternatus, you have the option to put an Umbreon VMAX out there. And if you do get the energy on it, even the 160 can deal enough weak damage to, say, a Gardevoir or a VMAX Mew to knock it out. So that's important. Other little ins and outs to this deck before I move on are things like the Galarian Moltres, just a single prizer here. I think it's important to have one somewhere in the deck besides Radiant Eternus, right? But we've also got Galarian Moltres V. This can charge up from our discard pile with energy from time to time, and I think that's a cool thing to be able to do too. But in case you have stuff like Galarian Moltres or say even Arceus V-Star or Squawkability on your bench that you want to get off your bench because it's kind of an easy target for a two-prizer, we are playing Penny in this deck, a little extra bit of technology, because not only does it let us save these easy target two-prizers from a certain doom, but it also lets us pick up our Radiant Eternus and put it right back down to use that ability again. Aside from that, we've got Dark Patch in the deck, really good card, especially in conjunction with the Ultra Balls and the Professor's researches in the deck and all these different ways to drop energy. Sometimes this can be a very important card, one of the best reasons to play a Dark deck right now. We've also got some of the usual suspects in this deck. We're playing Palpad. I like Palpad. You'll come to realize that as we go through this video. We're also playing Escape Rope and Switch as a 2-3 split respectively. It can be very important to be able to play these cards because a lot of our Pokemon have a relatively high retreat cost. And finally, we got Pokestop and Super Rod in here to kind of finish up the trainers. Just important things to play. I'm playing a whole 2 of Super Rod. I think that it might be a soft slot, at least one of them. So open to suggestions on all 3 of these decks, but especially this deck because this, again, is the newest deck that I've crafted. Having a lot of fun with it, but again, maybe one of these Super Rods will be better as a Gengar V. And finally, we're cramming in 2 Luminous Energy in the deck. I don't want to have too many of these because we're playing Dark Patch and we want to make good use of that. Galarian Moltres V cares about Dark Energy, so again, can't play too many of these, but this is effectively a Fire Energy for Radiant Eternatus so that it can attack sometimes. But we don't have to use it that way either. It can be a Dark Energy on, say, a Gengar VMAX if that's what we need it for at the time. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm an honest guy. This deck has felt a little 50-50 to me so far when I'm playing it, but when you do get those targeted matchups like Guardy and Mew VMAX, deck feels great when you get the right start. An early Radiant Eternus, a couple of energy on that Gengar VMAX, and you're kind of unbeatable. That said, there are games where the deck also just kind of falls apart and can't do a whole heck of a lot, right? A lot of our Pokemon require a lot of energy to get on them, so if Dark Patch or Arceus really aren't popping off, it can be hard to get something together. And not only our energy woes, there's obviously the problem that we are a deck that needs to have one specific card out of our 60 cards as early as possible, and that's sometimes going to lead to consistency issues. You don't get your Eternatus till turn 3, it doesn't matter as much at that point. So again, there are times where the deck just doesn't pop the way you want it to, but when it does, it is a lot of fun, and that counts for something. But we don't have all day, so let's keep it pushing and look at deck number 2, and this is where we really reach up into the cabinet and grab the spice. Before we get to the salt, which will be our 3rd deck of the day, but we do got to look at some really spicy stuff first, and this is quite the meatball right here. We're going to look at what I've called Pokemonza, but like a lot of people might not even get that reference. Even if you're a Magic player, we used to call land destruction decks Ponza decks. I have forgotten why. I knew 30 years ago. At this point, it is lost to time. I'm sure somebody down there in the comment section might know if you have the ancient knowledge. But still, that's why I'm calling this deck that. It's basically land destruction. But what if Pokemon? Now, to achieve our evil goals, we're starting with Seismitoad. This is a stage 2 evolution, but we're rare candying it. We have Irida to find the rare candy and the Seismitoad, much like the Baxcalibur deck. We're doing all that kind of stuff. But we're doing it with Seismitoad. This is a 170 HP Pokemon with a pretty decent attack, actually. Let me hit that first. It's just 2 blue energy for 120 damage, and then next turn, it does an extra 100 damage. So a 1-prizer hidden for 220, that's really not too bad, but what I'm worried about most here is Quaking Zone. As long as this Pokemon's in the active spot, attacks used by your opponent's active Pokemon cost a single colorless energy more. Truly a nefarious ability, but we're backing that up with stuff like Crushing Hammer, of course. Flip a coin. If it's head, you just get to throw an energy off of one of their Pokemon. That's pretty sick. But we've also got the new Pokemon League headquarters. This is a stadium. Attacks used by each basic Pokemon in play, both your and your opponents, cost a single colorless energy more. So I guess it's worth noting here first that Seismitoad not a basic. Now, not every Pokemon you'll be facing off against is a basic, but a lot of them will be, so this is going to shut a lot of people out of the game. Between Seismitoad and Pokemon League headquarters, sometimes it costs an extra couple of energy to attack, and who's got, in this economy, who's got that lying around? I guess I should also point out that Timpole is what we're evolving Seismitoad from. This is a 70 HP basic with an interesting attack given the rest of the context of the deck. You flip a coin. If it's heads, you Crushing Hammer. Just literally the attack is Crushing Hammer. Discard an energy from the opponent's active. So pretty disgusting. It's not quite Crushing Hammer because Hammer can get it off of any Pokemon, whereas Timpole's just the active, but still pretty relevant again with what our deck is doing. I guess another important line to point out in the deck is the 1/1 Alolan V-Star line here. If we do find ourselves in a situation where opponent has been able to charge up their Pokemon, sometimes we can just wall them out if they have an ability with this Vulpix, and often Pokemon tend to have abilities if they see a lot of play in Standard, so I guess we got that going for us. But I guess playing this line of V Pokemon along with the Lumineon V to find important supporters like Irida, for instance, which again goes and finds rare candy and a Seismitoad or whatever you want. That also allows us to play this Forest Sealstone, which just lets us go get whatever we want. Seems pretty good. And this deck needs to be able to do stuff like that because otherwise it runs out of steam pretty quickly. We are running the 3 of Iono in the deck along with the 2 of Professor's Research, so we are trying to churn as much as we can, but we still need stuff like Forest Sealstone and maybe even more importantly, the 2/2 Pidgeotty X line here. Forest Sealstone is so powerful. Imagine being able to Forest Sealstone every single turn. That's what Pidgeotty X does, and it does it pretty well. We've seen this in a few different decks at the beginning of the format here of Charizard, Chin-Pao. There's a reason for it. The card is kind of obscenely strong. This really keeps us from running out of gas, whether we go and get a research with it just to refill our hand, or we pinpoint something that we need situationally. I should probably at least bring up this Mewtwo over here. Not Mewtwo, but Mew as well. It has this ability, Mysterious Tail. Once during our turn, we look at the top 6 cards of our deck, reveal an item, put it in our hand, shuffle the other cards back into the deck. So this will help us find not only rare candy, but also Crushing Hammer. I should also point out too that Pidgeotty X will sometimes just go get a Crushing Hammer every turn, and that is extremely irritating for a lot of opponents. And I guess we'll round it out with some ball search. We got a Nest Ball and 4 Ultra Balls to go find. Not only the Seismitoads and the Pidgeotty X's, but of course the Lumineon V's to get us a supporter, or the Alolan Vulpix with a V-Star, just whatever we need. There's a lot of sort of silver bullet toolboxy stuff going on in this deck beyond the playset of Seismitoads. So it's nice to have these in here to make sure we just go get whatever we need. Now, so far, this deck has been pure evil fun to play. Even on the ladder, there's a lot of people that just aren't prepared for this. It's worth noting, too, on the ladder, this doesn't hit Charizard EX for weakness. None of these water Pokemon do, but it hits just about everything else in the Charizard EX deck for weakness, and that has mattered more than once. It's also, and I think this is important, just delightful to play this deck. I'm sure it's not a whole lot of fun for my opponent. I'm having the time of my life, so I apologize in advance in case you meet me on the ladder with this thing. And also, just kind of last thing about this deck, it's really budget to build in real life. I think that right now on PokemonCard.io, it says it's like $360 to build, but I'm pretty sure that's just because I added this particular Iono to the deck that's like $100 a piece. This deck shouldn't be more than like $50 to $60, something like that, to put together. The most expensive card in the deck is Pidgeotty X, by far at about $10 a piece. But beyond that, everything in here is fairly cheap, and it's a fun deck in case you're playing like at your local card shop or something for Pokemon night. This might be one to put together in case you're kind of bored of everything else you've been playing lately. It's a cool one. And finally, the salts. What's a meal without some sodium, right? I know a lot of people have been on Charizard. You've probably seen this deck a few times if you're on the TCG Live app. That's because a lot of people are excited about Charizard, and I do think that in a lot of ways, he is the real deal. This is the deck that I've been playing not only the most, but for the longest in the new format. I think it is good. In case you've been living under a rock and you haven't seen Charizard EX, this, of course, is a Stage 2 Pokemon. You probably knew that since you were 6 years old, but it has 330 HP. It retreats for 2 colorless energy, and it has Burning Darkness. Just 2 energy to deal 180 damage, plus 30 more for each prize card your opponent's taken. But the cool thing about this is Infernal Rain. When you evolve it, you just go get 3 fire energy from your deck and slap them on whatever Pokemon you want, however you like. This ability is, in fact, completely cracked in half. It's a very, very good ability to be on a Pokemon, but we've got other sort of accelerants in the deck. We've got some ramp in the form of Arceus V. mostly so we can play Arceus V-Star. Now, we are attacking with Arceus and Arceus V-Star in this deck a good bit, and we do have one copy of Entei V, which you won't see in every Charizard deck, but I'm doing that because I'm playing the Arceus Charizard build, and I do want at least one V Pokemon to throw energy on with Arceus. Mostly, however, we're going to be using Starbirth on Arceus V-Star in this deck. This will get 2 cards, whatever we want, as previously discussed. And in this deck, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. Obviously, it gets a Rare Candy and a Charizard, but sometimes it gets a Rare Candy and a Pidgeot EX. We're also playing this card in this deck as well. You know, the ability to go get whatever you want is pretty busted, so not surprising to see this in multiple decks, right? So sometimes the Arceus V-Star will go get Rare Candy, Pidgeot EX, and then the Pidgeot EX will go get either a Rare Candy or a Charizard, whichever piece you need to kind of complete the trifecta. It's especially important for this deck to play the 2-2 Pidgeot line because just like the last deck, it tends to run out of steam. Yes, we are playing 3 Iono, 2 Professor's Research, basically the same line as the last deck, but just like the last deck, that is not enough to not run out of cards in your hand and completely start kind of failing and flailing in the mid game, and we really don't want that. Not everybody has expressed real confidence in the Pidgeot line. Even this far into the format where multiple decks are playing the card, there are still Pidgeot haters, and I understand the idea of playing, say, a 1-1 Pidgeot EX line and cutting it to a 1-1 Bidoof Bibarel line, right? I could see playing 1-1 lines of both cards, especially considering Path to the Peak doesn't shut down Bibarel. Bibarel's a 1-prizer, so there are definitely reasons I see to take that technology, but we're not doing that here. Final Pokemon in the deck, besides I guess the Charmanders and 1 Charmeleon that we're playing here, is the one of Radiant Charizard. A lot of Charizards in the deck. 12-year-old me would be very happy with this pile. This is of course a 1-prizer that can often attack for just 1 energy if we're late enough into the game. Between this and Charizard EX's attack, if we do get fairly late into the game, our deck just gets better and better because our guys deal more and more damage, or at least they're more capable of dealing damage. Radiant Charizard's attack hits faster, and Charizard EX's attack hits for a buttload. Now, as far as all the other cards in the deck, that's where some of the actual innovation comes in because this is a slightly different list than I've seen going around on YouTube and online. I keep seeing the same basic list, but again, we're doing a few things slightly different. We're doing a lot of stuff the same, right? We're playing Battle VIP Pass, 2 Boss's Orders, a Choice Belt, some number of Switch effects. We've got Escape Rope and Switch in here. There's also 4 Rare Candies in here, as you might expect, right? That's basically a given. There's also 1 Super Rod. Not every deck is running these, but I just run so low on energy a lot of the time that I think 1 Super Rod is good enough, and sometimes this will get back a Radiant Charizard or an Entei that's in the yard, so I like that about it too. There's also a number of stadiums in this deck that I think are super important to play, and I'll get to why in a second, but we're running kind of toolboxy one-ofs of each of these, right? We got a Pokestop to find our Rare Candies and other items in here. We've got a Mesa Goza to find both Pidgeot EX and Charizard EX, as well as Arceus for what that's worth, and it's worth a lot. We do play this one of Magma Basin. A lot of these decks aren't on this, but I certainly am. This is just decent value for us. Obviously, we can throw energy onto benched Pokemon. That's something we want to be able to do, but it's also just a stadium. And that's good enough. We're running an Artisan, by the way. I want to get to that real quick before I really tell you why we're running so many stadiums. There's 4 total in this deck. And again, they're all one-ofs to get the kind of versatile value that we might be looking for. But Artisan and Mesa Goza basically search important Pokemon. That's all you need to know about them. But the reason that we're running 4 stadiums in the deck in total is that we really just want to run removal for Path to the Peak. A card that just bodies into the ground, embarrasses us, pushes our head into the dirt from the back. It's bad. We do not want to come up against Path to the Peak, and if we do, we want to have some way to remove it. Some Charizard lists are on Lost Vacuum right now, up to 2 of that card to just remove stadiums. But I personally would rather just play stadiums that benefit our game plan, rather than playing a card that makes us throw not only it away, but another card from our hand as well. So I just think it's probably better to run a lot of stadiums that you can draw into to take out a path than run the Lost Vacuums, but I could be wrong on that. There's even a worker in this deck to take out that Path to the Peak when we do see it. An underrated card here. I really like it, especially when, you know, the one card that shuts us down completely is a stadium. Worker looks a lot better, and she already looks pretty good. So, sweet little deck here. Again, not a whole lot of technology, and the only real tech outside of that is probably the Pal Pad. Another card that you just don't see too often. Instead, you'll often see a 3rd copy of Boss's Orders, which makes an awful lot of sense, but I'm playing Pal Pad instead of that third copy of Boss, which I think makes an awful lot of sense. There are a lot of times where I am trying to find another boss, right? Let's say a Pidgeot. Boss tends to be the card that Pidgeot searches for kind of the most often, especially in the mid and late game. So even with 3, I was running out of Boss's Orders a good amount of the time and kind of wished I had a Pal Pad. So I just took out a Boss's Orders, threw in a Pal Pad. Now when I've used both of my Boss's Orders, I can search for a Pal Pad or draw into Pal Pad somehow, put them back in my deck, and then search them up. So I think that Pal Pad has just mostly been better, and it's slightly more versatile because of Boss's Orders, that third Boss's. Always going to be a third Boss's Orders. Whereas this Pal Pad, if we have Pidgeot EX's ability up and can quick search for something after using Pal Pad, that can be not only a boss's, but it could also be an Iono to mess with our opponent's hand and disrupt them. It can be a Professor's Research to refresh entirely. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to run Pal Pad instead of the extra bosses here. But yeah, I figured I'd show you my Charizard build because everyone's showing you their Charizard deck, and I didn't want to feel left out. I want to be at the party, so here's my Charizard build. It's slightly, but only slightly different than what a lot of people are doing right now. So if you haven't tried out Zard yet, or you just want a slightly different brew here, give this thing a shot. I like it. And I do actually really like this thing. I've been having a ton of success with this on the ladder. This is a scary deck, and sometimes it just feels kind of cracked to have it in your hands and be playing it, right? Again, just like the first deck we looked at, the All Darkness deck with Gengar, VMax, and stuff, this will hit Gardevoir and Mew decks for weakness on their most important Pokemon. And again, those are the decks that were in the finals of the World Championships. Mew VMax put 3 decks in the top 8. Gardevoir was universally considered the strongest deck in the format going into the tournament, so you're going to be seeing a lot of those decks in the coming weeks, and this is very, very good against them. We haven't gotten any real results for Obsidian Flames tournaments, at least here in the West, as of release just yet, but we got some big tournaments coming up. Lord knows if Charizard will actually impact the meta the way a lot of us think that it will, or when it does happen, or if it does happen, what that list will look like. So again, always open to suggestions. If you've been doing something funky in your Charizard builds that we all need to know about, let us know in the comments section. I'm interested. I just want to know how you felt about all this today, and more than anything, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you subscribe. We're a brand new channel. This is our 3rd video here. I do have another channel for Magic the Gathering that we're doing okay on over there, but I'm trying to grow this one right now, so if you'd subscribe, it would mean a lot. We actually just got over 600 subscribers in our first month. I don't know how that happened. Thank you all who helped it happen. Maybe somebody said my name because the views on these videos kind of blew up overnight. Super thankful for whoever's helping out there, and if you just like the content and that's what's throwing it into the algorithm, I guess that's good for me too. I appreciate that. But either way, if you haven't subbed yet, we're trying to get to that 1K subs mark so we can monetize this content. It would help out an awful lot if you haven't done it yet. That's all the self-promotion. I'm basically done at this point, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me know how you felt about all this and what decks you're playing in the new format, this brave new world, and even how excited you are for 151 maybe because Obsidian Flames is a little scuffed, let's be honest. And on that note, I think our next video will be a 151 video, whether it's the top 10 or the sleepers or something. We'll be talking about 151 super soon. So again, subscribe for that content if you're interested in that. But for now, I'm going to actually get out of here. I keep saying I'm going to do it. I never do it. But all right. Bye. Thanks for watching, everybody. Spread love and be kind.